Hello, Jennifer. And hello to our Galaxy phone user. I don't know what your name is, but welcome. Jamie, Laura, Olympia. Looks like the Brown family. Welcome to all of you. Can I ask, can everyone hear me okay? If someone could just unmute themselves and let me know.
You look and sound great.
Great, thank you so much. All right, I think we have 15 people tonight. I'm not sure if everyone is going to attend the live event or not, so we will wait and see. Got a lot of people so far. So I hope everyone's doing okay today. Another crazy day in America. Ay. Did anyone have kids that started school today? I know mine did. My younger daughter started college at Loyola today in Chicago, and it's all online. It's all via Zoom. Crazy. She hates it already. I'm glad we're able to do this. I heard that Zoom crashed earlier today, so I was worried that we wouldn't be able to do this. I guess a lot of schools started today, and since everybody's online, I guess they crashed the whole system, but I guess they got it worked out, so that's good for us. Okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're about halfway there. Let's make sure I got everything set up right here. Okay. Hello to Laura number 2. Okay, we got 10, waiting for a few more. We'll wait a few more minutes and see if some others show up. I think, like I said, I think we have 15 people total tonight. I'm glad everyone can see and hear. We've had some big groups of people, and sometimes we've had bad people, some people couldn't see or some people couldn't hear, and I think it might have been a browser issue. So I'm glad everybody is good tonight. The recordings are fine, but sometimes the live for some people is not so good. Don't need sound. Okay, well, I think we will get started. Let's see if I can hide this. Okay, great. All right, let me put that back for just a second while I just say hello. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ursula Bielski. For those of you who do not know me, I'm a Chicago-based paranormal investigator, historian, folklorist, and I have been working on all this stuff in Chicago for almost 33 years. So it's been a long time. I just finished actually going to print this week is my 13th book. And almost all of my books are about Chicago's haunted history. And this one is called The Haunting of Joliet Prison. So it's going to be out hopefully September 1st. It's already available on Amazon, and I'm so excited about it. I'm actually going to be talking about the prison tonight because 2 of our 13 serial killers spent time at Joliet Prison. And we believe that one of them, at least one of them, has been seen and continues to be seen at Old Joliet Prison. So I have been doing this for a long, long time. I'm also one of the founders of, with my ex-husband, of Chicago Hauntings Tours, going into our 19th season this fall. Fingers crossed. Hopefully we can pull something off and get through this year. So thank you so much for being here. We've been shut down essentially since March 13th. Unlucky Friday the 13th for us. And so this is, I think, maybe the 20th live stream lecture or event that we've done. And it's been a way for us to continue to bring this kind of content to our followers and also a lot of new people too, all over the country and all over the world. So I'm glad you're here with us. And we really appreciate you being here too, because it's been really rough keeping our business going and keeping our tour guides paid and everything during this time, of course, keeping the bills paid. And this really, really helps us. So you're really doing a wonderful, heroic thing by helping to support businesses like us during this time. But aside from that, I really hope you enjoyed tonight because this is some really great historical content and some really important historical content too, with some very chilling ghost stories attached to it. Now, as you probably know, I'm from Chicago, as like I just said, and I've been working here for a long time. And Chicago and serial killers, for some reason, are just inextricably connected. We always joke there must be something in the water that, that creates serial killers in Chicago, because not only have some of the really big ones committed their atrocious acts here. Some of them are from here. Some of them spent a lot of time here. I don't know why this is. There's a lot of talk, and I've written a lot about the idea that Chicago is a kind of a cursed place going back to Native American times, and that a lot of the dark history here too comes from the encroachment on Indian lands, and also the topographical argument for the haunting of Chicago comes up a lot. All the water in Chicago, people often talk about as being instrumental in paranormal activity. And there have been some paranormal researchers who have even said that just the place where Chicago is on the earth makes it a very chaotic place for various reasons, which might also inspire this kind of activity in people. So I don't know, there are a lot of different theories about why so many serial killers should have been from Chicago, but at any rate, my point is that I've been studying serial killers for a long time because they're so connected to, my main body of research and work for the last 30 years. So, all right, I'm going to shut off our video so we can see you guys can see the whole screen, and let us get started with our first despicable person. Of course, we're going to start all the way back at the beginning with, kind of the standard setter for the modern serial killer, the infamous murderer known as Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper is a really kind of interesting and unique character, because we really don't even know to this day, with all of the people that have investigated this case and everybody that's been working on you finding out who he really was, who this murderer was for all of these years, well over a century now. It's still not even certain if one person committed all of these murders. Of course, these murders were known as the Whitechapel murders. Also, they were committed in the Whitechapel district of London in the year 1888. And they're also, even though Jack the Ripper is the most famous name given to the murder, nickname, He's also known as the Whitechapel Murderer for obvious reasons. And also the Leather Apron is another nickname. I've never heard that before. Another interesting nickname. Now, all of these murders that swirled around the name of Jack the Ripper and Whitechapel had to do with young women who were prostitutes. And that was something that they all had in common. Another thing they all had in common was the fact that they had been attacked abdominally, and for many of them, their organs had been removed. And so this led a lot of investigators at Scotland Yard and journalists also in the newspapers at the time to believe that these murders were being committed by a doctor, specifically a surgeon, because of all of this that was happening. There was that very famous letter that was written. It's called the From Hell letter, because that's the way it was signed, which was received by a man named George Locke, who was part of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee that had been set up to protect women and others in the area from this Jack the Ripper. And he received that letter along with half of a human kidney, which was purportedly taken from one of the Ripper's victims. Now, the public became of the mind that all of these murders were being committed by one person, but that was largely because of the press. The press had assigned this nickname of Jack the Ripper to the murderer. It was largely the press who believed that, or put forth the theory that one person was committing all of these murders. But there was another long series of murders that happened between 1888 and 1891 of many other young women, and they were a lot of them were very similar to the original murders, and we still don't know, as the murders are still not solved, if these were committed by the same person or not. But what we do know is that Jack the Ripper has gone down in history as one of the most infamous, probably the most infamous serial killer of all time, and certainly the first of the modern serial killers that we're familiar with. And of course, there are many ghosts and hauntings associated with the Ripper murders. You can go to London, as you probably know, and take 10 different ghost tours that are all the Whitechapel ghost tours, where you go to all the different locations where the victims of Jack the Ripper were found, where the murders were committed, and hear a lot of the ghost stories associated with it. And now, two of my favorite stories take place in this area. One is the story of the 10 Bells pub. And this was, it's a beautiful pub, very old, of course, going back to long before the murders in 1888. And this was the pub where the last victim of Jack the Ripper was believed to have drank the night of her murder, and that was a girl named Mary Kelly. Her body was found horrifically mutilated, practically dismembered the next morning in Miller's Court, which was right across the street from the 10 Bells. And the sensation of Jack the Ripper really attached itself to the pub, and it was called actually the Jack the Ripper by locals for many, many years after this event. But it kind of took on a really negative and distasteful connotation, because the owner started serving like red colored drinks named after victims of Jack the Ripper and things like that. So in the 1990s, the current owners renamed or kind of took the name back to the original name of the 10 Bells. But for generations, I mean, well over 80 years probably, staff members of the pub who live in those upstairs apartments at the 10 Bells have talked about waking up in the middle of the night in their beds, and there's a man in bed with them. And they describe him as a Victorian gentleman. Many of them say that he has a mustache. And he actually jumps out of bed when they scream or cry out when they see him. And some people have said that he just vanishes. Others have said that he runs right through the locked door of the room or the wall of the room and disappears. And that's the 10 Bells pub. The other place that's really fascinating to me is the haunting of Westminster Bridge in London by Jack the Ripper. Now, some people, according to legend, will say that Jack the Ripper committed suicide at the end of 1888, at the end of his murder spree, by jumping off of the Westminster Bridge at midnight on New Year's Eve at the turn of 1888 to 1889. And so every New Year's Eve, you'll see people gather on Westminster Bridge, hoping to see the ghost of Jack the Ripper fling himself into the Thames as the year changes, as so many people believe that he actually did when he was alive during the course of the murders. Now, very closely associated with the Ripper murders are the murders of this guy, Herman Webster Mudgett, more famously known as H.H. Holmes. But H.H. Holmes is someone I'm intimately familiar with, being from Chicago, because Chicago is where Holmes built his so-called murder castle, or castle of death. He built this elaborate building, a hotel of sorts, on the south side of Chicago at 63rd and Wallace, for visitors to the World's Fair. He specifically built this building to lure victims to it, to kill them. Now, Holmes was also a doctor, just like we believe the Jack the Ripper murderer was. And he, used his surgical skill on his victims oftentimes. And some of the times he would keep the bodies intact and sell them, the cadavers, to medical schools. Sometimes he would remove all of the flesh and sell the skeletons to medical schools. Other times he would use the bodies in insurance schemes, passing them off as his own or somebody else's in order to collect insurance money. So this was the building that he built, and it was this elaborate maze of rooms, staircases that went nowhere. Each room had a sleeping room had a gas jet that went in, so he could gas people in their sleep. There were chutes that went down to the basement of the hotel. I thought I had a picture of here, the diagram, but I don't. And so what he would do is he would put ads in the newspapers. This was one of the ways that he would attract people, and he would advertise for help at his hotel. He especially liked young women to come to his hotel and work for him. He was definitely a ladies' man who had a whole string of wives, marriages, overlapping one another, not a big fan of divorce. And he would lure these young women to work at his hotel, and then he would murder them. And we don't know to this day how many young women disappeared coming to Chicago to work for Mr. Mudgett. Another thing that he would do was to go to the hotels in downtown Chicago, these huge hotels that had been built for the World's Fair specifically. And he'd go to people that are waiting in line to register and say, why don't you come and stay at my brand new hotel? It's right by the fairgrounds in Jackson Park. It was like a mile walk from the fairgrounds, as opposed to having to take a carriage or take the Alley L to the fairgrounds. He gave him a great price, of course. And so we got a lot of people to come to the hotel this way. And we think he killed a number of people that he lured to the hotel in this way as well. Now, Mudgett was finally arrested for the murder of an associate of him that had actually worked on some insurance schemes with him, a man by the name of Benjamin Peitzel. And he was finally arrested. Holmes was finally arrested in Pennsylvania for the murder of Peitzel and put to death by execution at Westminster Prison. And there are all sorts of legends that surround the death of H.H. Holmes, including many people saying that there was a Holmes curse, because many people that were associated with the arrest and sentencing and execution of Holmes had these weird things befall them, strange illnesses, freak accidents, and deaths. And everyone wondered if there was some sort of, kind of curse by association with him. And even today, this curse is talked about in Englewood, where Holmes built his castle. This site today, the castle burned down after Holmes was arrested. This gentleman, who was his caretaker, even after he was arrested, committed suicide. And as you can see by the headline of the newspaper here of the time, he told his friends and relatives that the victims of Holmes, who he felt kind of, like he had been an accomplice in, had been hounding him and haunting him. And he said he couldn't take it anymore, so he ended up taking his own life. And then the castle eventually burned down. So the site of the castle today is a post office that was built in the 1930s. And now I filmed a documentary for PBS about 10 years ago now called The Hauntings of Chicago. You can find it on YouTube. It's a 2-part series. And we were allowed to film inside the post office, and we actually had the postal staff there reenact some of the experiences that they had at that they have had and continue to have at the post office even today. When we went there to film, they told us, do not go down in the basement. It's a terrible haunted place. And there's actually one of the walls of the basement of the post office. There's a wall that's shared with the basement of the Holmes Castle. So there's actually part of the castle, the foundation, that's still there, even though the castle is gone. They say that they see apparitions of young women in the basement. They have heard whistling and humming and singing. They feel watched constantly in the basement. And they also say there's a lot of poltergeist activity where there are objects that fly around and move around. If you watch the film, you'll see that one very harrowing event that happened in the basement some years ago happened to one of the postal workers that was down stacking some boxes, and she heard a sound around the corner. She went to look to see if it was one of her colleagues, and there was no one there, and there was just a row of chairs lined up in the hallway. So she went back around the corner and back to her work, and she heard the sound again. So she called out to her colleague Phyllis and went back around the corner. Again, no one there, but all of those chairs in the hallway had stacked themselves up upon each other with absolutely nobody there. Another site that's supposedly connected to the haunting of H.H. Holmes is this place. It's currently the Museum of Science and Industry in Jackson Park. You may have visited here. This was part of the World's Fair buildings at the World's Fair of 1891. Now, this building originally was the Palace of Fine Arts. It was the art museum of the fair, and it housed priceless art treasures from around the world during that year. It was the only building that was meant to be permanent at the fair. Everything else was a temporary structure. Holmes, of course, would have strolled the halls of this building, probably looking for victims. So it's really not surprising that he is believed to haunt the building, along with many other ghost stories here. And the exhibit hall that he concentrates his haunting on is this one. If you've been in the museum, you probably recognize this. It's an exhibit hall called Yesterday's Main Street. And as you can see, it's really cutely set up to look like a turn-of-the-century street scene in Chicago, with cobblestone street and all these lovely little storefronts to look like, you know, the city at the turn of the 19th century. Well, I spoke at an event for kids at Halloween about probably 15 years ago now. And during that event, excuse me, one of the security guards came up to me and he put a note into my hand, folded up note into my hand. And I unfolded the note after he walked away, and it said, "They told us not to talk to you, but I wanted to ask you to call me." So of course I called him the next day, and he told me about all the hauntings at the museum and told me all the stories are true. And he told me a couple of stories that I had never heard about the museum before, including this one. He said that during the night, oftentimes, when the security guards and staff members are making the rounds of the museum after closure, they will see this figure walking through the Yesterday's Main Street exhibit in a top coat and a fedora hat with a black mustache on his face, who they have actually come to believe is the ghost of H.H. Holmes. So next time you're at the Museum of Science and Industry, be sure to keep a lookout for the ghosts of what we know is America's serial killer. As you may know, there was a whole series that was done on History Channel called American Ripper last year, a great series starring Herman Webster Mudgett's great-great-great-grandson, Jeff Mudgett, who's become a very good friend of ours here at Chicago Hauntings, spoken at a lot of our events over the years and co-hosted our Devil in the White City tours with us. And Jeff Mudgett has come to believe that his ancestor may have committed some of the Jack the Ripper murders. So that's, you know, kind of an interesting thing to consider. If you're interested in that, you can find that series. It was on History Channel, and I think the reruns are on YouTube. So it's a great series, and they travel to London and they travel to New York, Chicago, of course, in search of this possibilities. And the whole series ends up with the exhumation of the grave of H.H. Holmes. So it's pretty cool and interesting. I won't give the ending away to you, but you might want to check that out. Many people have said that the deeds of this gentleman, and I put my video on because someone texted me and said, put on your video, I want to see your face. Okay, I talk with my hands a lot. They probably want to see my hands because I'm very animated. So thank you for that. Many people say that the deeds or misdeeds of this gentleman on your screen were eclipsed because of the murders of H.H. Holmes, which were contemporary with the murders of this guy, Dr. Thomas Neal Cream. Cream was an interesting character. His first string of murders were committed in Canada, and he also committed many murders in Chicago. He was also a doctor, and he liked to poison people, especially young women who he was involved with. He was also a midwife. So a lot of what he did was involved in midwifery and the delivery of children, which is really exceptionally horrific. Now, Cream was arrested in Chicago, and he did some time at Old Joliet Prison, but he was released on parole. So he left Chicago at that time and he went to London, and he went on to kill numerous women in London because of his release on parole from Joliet. And he also fled back to Canada and committed more murders there. Now, they say that today the ghost of Dr. Cream not only haunts the medical school campus where he went to school in Ontario, but more significantly haunts Newgate Prison here in London, as you can see on your screen, where he was executed. Now, the prison is not here anymore. There's a government building there, but in that government building, people claim to see that top-hatted figure of Cream kind of strolling up and down the hallways in the middle of the night when the building is closed. And they also claim that there's a ghost dog that's seen in the vicinity of the old Newgate Prison. And this was a ghost of the prison that was seen at the prison for centuries. This prison was ancient, almost, seriously. So there was this black kind of demon dog that was a famous ghost at the prison. And some people believe that even today, that dog spirit is also inhabited by the murderous spirit of Thomas Cream, who was incarcerated at the prison. So some interesting ghost stories surrounding Thomas Cream, who's believed to have killed possibly as many as a dozen people. Now, the serial killer world is not limited to men. There are many, many, many female serial killers. Actually, I found a few more serial killers when I was researching the Joliet Prison book. In fact, there was one I was going to include, but I wanted to keep our number 13, but I'll still tell you about her. Her name was Tilly Klimek, and she was a Eastern European immigrant that lived in Chicago in the late 19th century. And she ended up poisoning 5 of her husbands and also family members of her that she just didn't like or that ticked her off, and also some neighbors of hers. She would invite her neighbors over to dinner and then just poison them all. One time she was not invited to a relative's wedding, so she invited the mother over to dinner the next week and poisoned her. It's believed that Tilly may have killed as many as 24 people on the north side of Chicago in the late 19th century, and she went to Joliet Prison where she died eventually. Probably, I would say the most famous serial killer, at least in American history, is this woman, Belle Gunness. And you can see her here with several of her children. Belle Gunness, also known as Hell's Belle, was an immigrant who was living in Chicago in the late 19th century when she began her murder spree. She ran a candy store and soda fountain with her husband, originally in Chicago, ended up killing him. And after she killed him, she started to advertise for new husbands in the newspapers around the country. And she only had 2 qualifications for husbands. 1, have a lot of money. 2, be willing to relocate. And it was in this way that she lured a number of men, not only Chicago, but primarily to Northwest Indiana, to the Gunness farm, where she committed just untold atrocities, including the murders of her children. whose bodies were eventually found on the Gunnis farm when Belle was found out. Now, Belle was found beheaded. Her head was nowhere near the body that was found on the farm after there was a huge fire at the farm. And the whole thing is it was kind of mysterious, but it turned out that a farmhand at the Gunnis farm was involved with Belle. And they had this sort of pact where if Belle was going to be, found out, that he was going to make sure that she wasn't discovered. Some people believe that Belle Gunnis escaped and that the headless body that was found in the Belle farm actually wasn't her at all. That headless body ended up being buried at Forest Home Cemetery, just west of Chicago. And to this day, there are stories at Forest Home of this phantom head that is seen hovering around the gravesite where Belle Gunnis and her remaining children were buried. There was an exhibition that was done a couple of years ago to try and get some DNA to see if they could identify the body as Belle Gunnis, and they found the remains of body parts of other children that weren't Belle Gunnis's in the casket as well. So it continues to be this ongoing and escalating mystery over the years. But that farm today, where they excavated under the farmhouse and found, I think it was 30. I think they found 13 victims on the farm, including not only under the house and in the yard, but also in the hog pen where she would just feed her victims to the hogs to eat on the farm. It's believed that she probably killed about 40 people, possibly even more, during her many years of murder. Typically, what she would do was to bash her victims over the head with a meat grinder that she kept in the kitchen and then dispose of them. Now, we do know that in the farmhouse that was built on top of this property that's owned there today, the current owners talk about a lot of poltergeist activity in the house, especially in the root cellar. They say they hear footsteps down there all the time and on the root cellar steps. A lot of times all of the jars, of canning will be splattered all over the place. They also talk about hearing noises out in the yard, especially near the hog pen where a lot of the bodies were found. And then on the adjacent property, this used to be all the Belle Gunnis property, but there was another house built kind of on the same property, but now it's a separate property. And that owner was gardening a few years ago, and she actually found a human finger, while she was gardening. So apparently detectives did not even get all of the victims that were there at the Gunnis farm. And it's still a lot of haunting activity going on at that location today. And this is in, I believe it's Porter, Indiana. Oh, the most gruesome of the gruesome, the cannibal serial killers. And of course, specializing in children. Horrible, horrible. Albert Fish was known as the Brooklyn Vampire when he went on his killing spree in the late 19th century and early 20th century. He was a child rapist, and he told police that he believed he had raped and killed at least 100 children. And he said that he had done so, had raped and killed one child, and at least one child in every state of the continental United States. He began at some point to eat his victims. He would dismember them and consume them. And he was convicted of 5 murders that detectives were able to pin on him. And the most famous one was the murder of a little girl named Grace Budd. Grace Budd lived with her brothers and sisters in New York, and they lived in a place called Wisteria House. And Fish lived in a cottage behind the property. You can see the Wisteria House here. And the cottage, which is no longer there today, was the place where, I'm sorry, he did not live here, but this is where he dismembered little Grace Budd. And then he took the remains home to his own home in New York and consumed her. And there was a series of just horrific letters that surfaced after Fish was arrested, in which he talked about the way that he picked out his victims, saying that, he picked out one boy because he had the fattest ASS, another child because she looked like she was delicious, and things like this. Just absolutely diabolical in what he did. Now, this property, the Wisteria House, which was the main property and the property where Grace Budd was dismembered, was put on the market for sale, I believe, in 2014. And at that time, a lot of talk erupted about the house being haunted, because it was right after the same time where there was another big case in New York where the owners didn't disclose that the house was supposedly haunted, and then the buyers ended up suing because of all the stuff that was going on in the house. So after that case, many states develop real estate laws in which you have to disclose if a house is reported to be haunted, but most importantly, you have to disclose whether a murder was committed on the property. So this would definitely apply here. But people talk about not only the apparition of a man seen kind of creeping around the property after that house was torn down, the cottage where little Grace Budd was dismembered, but also walking around the house itself. They also talk about seeing lights hovering around the area of the cottage, where the cottage was, almost as if maybe perhaps the spirit of Grace Budd at the site of her murder, or perhaps the ghost of Albert Fish, the murderer himself, returning to the scene of his crime, as so many murderers actually do in life after they commit their atrocities. Oh my God, another horrific killer, Ed Gein. They also call him the Butcher of Plainfield. He committed his murders in Plainfield, Wisconsin, where he lived in a farmhouse with his mother. And if you're not familiar with the story of Ed Gein directly, you're probably familiar with it anyway, because he was the inspiration for so many films, including Silence of the Lambs, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, because it's estimated that he went to the local graveyard over the period of an unknown number of years and exhumed probably almost 4 dozen bodies and brought them back to the farmhouse in Plainfield. And he would skin the bodies, and he would, there's the house torn down now. He would skin the bodies and he would make mementos out of them. The police found several faces of victims in the house. They found utensils that he had made out, eating utensils he had made out of the bones of his victims. They found several pieces of furniture that had been upholstered with human skin. And you can see the state of the kitchen here. It was very strange when they investigated the house after his arrest, because after his mother's death in 1945, he was very attached to, just like in Silence of the Lambs, he told detectives that his goal was to make a woman's suit out of human skin so that he could put it on and become his mother, so he could be with his mother again. So he would actually look for bodies in the graveyard of women that looked like his mother. So it was a very weird mother thing, also very similar, of course, to Psycho. Now, some of the rooms in the house that his mother had used in life, he closed off, and they were beautiful, kept beautifully intact, just like his mother kept them. The rest of the house that he lived in looked like this kitchen, where detectives found body parts and bones and these grisly artifacts that he had made. He also actually committed several murders. And one of the most famous, or probably the most famous, was the murder of the local hardware store owner by the name of, the hardware store owner who is named Bernice Worden. Now, they didn't know really at first that this was connected to this, but they finally found enough evidence where this all lined up, and then they actually found the body in the garage of the house, and the body was nude and had been hung upside down and slit, as you can see, all the way up from the abdomen to almost to the throat. Now, there are many artifacts that were taken out of that scene, and then they were cataloged and destroyed. Whole human skeletons, a wastebasket made of human skin, the upholstered furniture upholstered with human skin, skulls on his bedposts, female skulls with the tops sewn off of them, bowls made of skulls that he would eat from, the utensils made of bones that he would eat with, a corset, a woman's corset that he made out of a female torso that he had skinned, leggings that he had made from leg skin, the face masks, Mary Hogan, one of his victims, skull he kept in a box. Oh my gosh. Sexual organs that he kept in boxes, 4 noses, a pair of lips that he had affixed to a window shade as a drawstring, fingernails, and a lampshade made of human skin. They were disposed of, again, after they were cataloged. A lot of people claim to have these artifacts. They were all disposed of. So that's a fraud, that's fake. Now, hauntings. There is a road outside of I'm going to go back to the farmhouse so we don't have to look at that anymore. The farmhouse is gone. Property, of course, is still there. There's nothing built on it. There's a no trespassing sign on just about every tree within like a 2-block area of where the house was. But people have said for years that driving past that property out on the road and driving down the path to where the house was, they encounter apparitions who like bang on the windows of the car or try to get into the car. People also talk about hearing sobbing coming from the property, screaming coming from the property. The garage of the property where Gein had strung up the hardware store owner was also where he kept a cauldron where he would boil the skin off of his victims. And you might have heard that cauldron was purchased in the last few years by Zach Bagans, who is the host of the Travel Channel show Ghost Adventures. And as you may or may not know, Zach Bagans a few years ago opened up a museum in Las Vegas, Nevada, called the Haunted Museum. And a big part of the museum is artifacts connected to serial killers. There's a lot of haunted objects in the museum, but a lot of them have to do with serial killers because Zach has like an obsession with serial killers that he's developed. And one of the objects that he has purchased is this cauldron that you can see in the picture that was used by Ed Gein to boil the skin off his victims. And Zach, there was actually an episode of the show. He did a series that was serial killer hauntings last fall, I think. It was Old Joliet Prison, and I don't know, I think it was Ted Bundy, which we'll get to, and a couple others. And this was one of them, so you can watch that episode. But he claims that since he brought this cauldron into the museum, that he has seen, and visitors to the museum have seen, the ghost of Ed Gein in the museum, down to that hunting cap that he always so famously wore, like in this first photo. So, you know, a lot of these cases, it's not just the victims that are haunting, it's the murderers themselves that, you know, which seems understandable, definitely not resting in peace. Ted Bundy. Now, Ted Bundy, everybody was familiar with and was following so closely because he was such a charismatic, handsome young man. And this was, you know, this was how he lured his victims. He was so attractive to young women. So it was very simple of him to get women to talk to him, give rides to him, take rides for him. But in addition to that just appearance of him, he also would play like the victim. And, you know, he would say that his car broke down and things like that. That was something that he used to do all the time. Now, it is believed that Bundy may have committed as many as 30 murders, and in a lot of states, in as many as 7 states, in just a 4-year period between 1974 and 1978. Many detectives and investigators believe that the number is possibly a lot higher. He was also extremely gruesome with his victims. He would often take their bodies into the mountains and leave them there, and then he would return to the bodies and he would have sexual intercourse or perform other sexual acts on the decomposing corpses. He would continue to do this, return to the scene of the corpse until animals had so terribly mutilated the bodies that he could no longer interact with them the way that he wanted to. He decapitated at least a dozen of his victims, and he kept some of them in his apartment as souvenirs of the murders. He was imprisoned for the first time when he was 1975 for aggravated kidnapping and attempted assault. And then police started to connect him to other murders that were happening in a lot of different states, and they started to see the similarities in the murders. Now, he was finally captured and put on trial in Florida for 3 murders, and he was sentenced, and of course, sentenced to be executed in prison at Florida State Prison, where he was electrocuted in the electric chair at Florida State Prison in 1989. And it's that prison that we're going to get back to in a second, because this prison is the scene of a very active haunting by, it is believed, Ted Bundy. Before I get to that, I just want to mention a couple other things really quickly. You may have watched the result of the filming, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. Good show. The actress Lily Collins played a character named Liz Kendall, who was based on one of Bundy's real victims by the name of Elizabeth Klepfer. She was actually the girlfriend of Ted Bundy. So this story kind of tells about their relationship from the girl's point of view. And this actress, Lily Collins, claims that while she was filming this movie, that she would start waking up at 3:05 in the morning every night. And she started to have these images in her head when she would wake up. She said it was like watching a movie on a screen. Like she was wide awake, but she was seeing these images before her, and she would see people struggling, a man and a woman struggling. She would see women's faces appear in front of her, and she really came to believe that it was the victims of Ted Bundy that were coming to her in her, not in her dreams, but in a very real way. Their spirits were coming to her, and she believed that it was a good sign, and it was a sign that they approved of what she was doing. They approved of this film being made, and they were glad that their stories were being told. So that was kind of interesting. Now there was another, this is another story that was covered by Ghost Adventures. And Ghost Adventures decided to visit for their show and for the filming of their episode, a house in Bountiful, Utah. And this was a house where Bundy had abducted and taken a 17-year-old girl named Deborah Kent. And police believe that he kept her there for about 24 hours, but they don't know where he actually murdered her, if he murdered her in the house or if he murdered her elsewhere. Her remains were found not until over 20 years later, buried in Fruit Heights in Utah, some distance away from the house. But locals really believe that Bundy killed her at this house. And it's after the murders, it became a known place for people to go and perform ritual activity. This is something that happens a lot. When murders occur, especially brutal murders like this, it becomes a magnet for Satanists to come and perform their rituals. They believe that dark energy is not only the result of demonic activity, like demon-possessed person, but they also believe that produces a very strong energy that they can tap into to use in magical spells and in their rituals. So this house became a magnet for Satanists. Now, Zach Bagans and the crew visited this site and they filmed there for the show. I won't give the whole show away, but they found some interesting evidence there that suggested that this young girl who was victimized by Bundy still does have a paranormal presence at this one house. Now, as mentioned, it was already on that picture. Now, as mentioned, this is a very extremely actively haunted site connected to Ted Bundy, Florida State Prison, where he was executed in the state electric chair in 1989. This is a story that is told not only by inmates, by guards, by the prison staff, even by the warden who has told the story, and even visitors who have visited the prison have claimed to have encounters with Ted Bundy. Now, the first guard to really speak publicly about this was in 2001. And he said that shortly after Bundy was put to death in the electric chair, that he and several other guards saw Bundy still sitting, just sitting casually in the electric chair hours after he had been killed and his body taken away. And they said he's had that same, casual, happy, calm, charismatic, hey, what's going on, smile on his face that he always had on in prison up until the moment of his death. Now, they said that these sightings went on so often, not only seeing him in the chair when the room was being cleaned and things like that, but also seeing him walking around the prison, seeing him in his old cell, seeing him in the exercise yard and other parts of the prison. They said that these appearances were so common that there were certain areas of the prison that people would not enter by themselves. Guards would not enter by themselves because Bundy was so often seen in these places. So unusual in the annals of paranormal research to have these appearances happen so often, especially to so many different people. Really interesting. Now, on one occasion, Bundy supposedly showed up at his holding cell on death row where he had been held before his execution. And again, it wasn't one guard, but numerous guards who saw him in the cell, and he would talk to them as they walked by the cell. And to one of the guards, he said, well, I beat all of you, didn't I? And he would say, kind of other things like that to the guards that went by, sort of joking, mocking things, usually referring to death in some way like that. Like, I beat you guys to I beat death, beat you guys, you couldn't kill me. Very strange. So Many, many occurrences. I can go on and on about this. This is like a whole lecture about Ted Bundy's ghost, but we still have a lot of a lot of killers left, so we have to move on. Jeffrey Dahmer, another one of our friendly neighborhood cannibals. Another story that we talk about a lot in Chicago. In fact, along our ghost tour route, we often, when we do pub crawls or haunted pub crawls, we often stop at a tavern on the north side on Clark Street, right at Belmont Avenue, called the L&L. This was a place where Jeffrey Dahmer used to hang out in the 1980s during the new wave punk rock era. For any of you are familiar with Chicago's north side, especially in just the last couple of weeks, there used to be a club on Sheffield, just about a block or so away from this pub, from this tavern called Medusa's, and it was an all-ages nightclub. The owner just passed away last week, Dave Medusa, so there's been a lot about that in the news lately. But so there would be a lot of young kids that would go to this nightclub at night, myself included. And there was a Dunkin' Donuts on the corner right across from the tavern. We used to call it Punkin' Donuts because when Medusa's closed at night, all the kids would go to Dunkin' Donuts and hang out in the parking lot until the cops came and told us to all get lost. So Jeffrey Dahmer would sit in the window. There's a bar stools in the window of the L&L Tavern, and he would check out the young boys in the parking lot at Punkin' Donuts. And so, of course, he was from Milwaukee, from Wisconsin. He lived in Milwaukee, and that's where he committed, we believe, all or most of his murders. But he would prey on victims elsewhere, and he liked to come to Chicago a lot, and he would hang out there, and he would have sexual liaisons with young men in that area in Boys Town, which is right just east of there. He would also go down to Washington Park, where we'll hear later Gacy used to go there too, and cruise guys down in that area by the Newberry Library. The hauntings connected with Jeffrey Dahmer. Let me just talk a little bit more about him really quickly as far as the statistics. Also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, the Milwaukee Monster. He is believed to have killed and dismembered 17 men and young boys between 1978 and 1991. And many of the murders involved necrophilia, where he would have sexual relations with the dead bodies, and also cannibalism. He would actually remove the skin from the bodies or dismember the bodies in his apartment. Very famously, police found, the head of one of his victims in his refrigerator, which a lot of jokes were made about and things like that at the time, sadly. So just really, really horrible, horrible stuff. Now, he was found to be legally sane at his trial. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He was convicted of 15 of the 16 murders that he had committed in Wisconsin, and he was sentenced to 15 terms of life in prison. But he was killed in prison. He ended up being beaten to death by a man named another inmate named Christopher Scarver, who had a connection to one of the victims of Dahmer. So that was a violent end to a violent life. Now, as far as hauntings go, the most famous one is the haunting of Merrill Hall at Ohio State University, where Jeffrey Dahmer attended college briefly before going off to fight in the Vietnam War. There is a lot of talk, even today, by students who have lived in this building over the years. They really believe that Jeffrey Dahmer, who lived in room 541 on the 5th floor, is haunting not only this room, but the entire building. They see him walking up and down the hallway. They see him in the room. There's, of course, the legend that no one can stay in that room. People say they hear voices at night in the room when they're trying to sleep. Many people who have slept in that room and in other rooms in the building, on all different floors of the building, say they wake up at night and see this man standing over their bed, staring at them. So many of those stories, and nobody can really, verify that it's the ghost of Jeffrey Dahmer, but that is absolutely the feeling among most of the people who have encountered him there over the years, and most of the people that tell that story at the campus today. Oops. I'm so sorry. This was, got my slides mixed up. This is the house that was connected to the Ted Bundy murder, where it's believed that that young woman was actually killed inside the house. And you can see more about this house on Ghost Adventures, but it is believed that this house is haunted by the spirit of at least that victim, and very even possibly the ghost of Ted Bundy himself. Okay. Andrew Cunanan. This is another story that's gotten a lot of press. We love serial killers today, don't we? There's all of these, Netflix shows and everything about serial killers, and a lot of shows too, like Criminal Minds and American Horror Story, incorporate a lot of these real life cases into their fictional storylines. I was so fascinated last year. My daughter sometimes watches Criminal Minds. I'll sometimes watch with her. And there was an episode I saw last year. Maybe you've seen it too if you watch the show. You probably do if you're at this lecture tonight. That was based on those two girls in Wisconsin a few years ago who tried to kill their classmate as a gift for Slender Man. They believed this Slender Man character lived up in the national forest in Wisconsin, and they were trying to kill their classmate as like a sacrifice to Slender Man. But there was an episode of Criminal Minds that was based on that. Very weird, really creepy story. Those girls in prison, of course, today. But Andrew Cunanan, of course, the whole series made about the Cunanan, I always pronounce it wrong, Andrew Cunanan. He killed 5 people. It doesn't seem a lot, right, compared to a lot of these other people that we've looked about and that we're going to get to also. But it was a really strange case because there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to them at first, and there didn't seem to be any similarity, and they were all over in different states. This had a weird connection for me because one of the victims was Lee Miglin, big famous financier here in Chicago. There's even a street named after him in downtown Chicago. You may know his wife too, Marilyn Miglin, has a big famous cosmetics line. You might see her on QVC sometimes selling her cosmetics. But that family actually is close with my brother, so I had known the family. And so this was very strange because Lee Miglin was found, murdered and strangled and all taped up in his garage. And it was very weird. But as it turned out that there was some kind of a gay connection between Cunanan and all of these people, and whether they had known each other or there were thwarted romances and things like that. But it was a very complicated case. It was very difficult for detectives to figure out. Very famously, not only Lee Miglin, but even more famously, his most infamous victim was the designer Gianni Versace, who he killed execution style on the front steps of his mansion in Miami Beach. Now, that mansion is believed to be haunted by Gianni Versace since his murder by Andrew Cunanan. But I wasn't aware of this before. I was aware of the haunting. People say that they still see Gianni Versace out by the pool. They still say they see him walking around his bedroom. This is a hotel today. You can actually sleep in Gianni Versace's bedroom, haunted bedroom at this hotel. So he's there, but they say it's not negative. It's a very uplifting and peaceful spirit that's there, that's believed to be Gianni Versace, which is in contrast to the other spirits of the mansion. This place has a very long history of like a dark, kind of diabolical vibe. And many people over the years who have owned the building and who have stayed here have talked about this. People talk about sleeping in the bedrooms and hearing, and their they wake up and they go to breakfast in the morning, and people ask, oh, how did you sleep? And they say, I couldn't sleep at all because of the person in my closet. They claim that when you try to sleep in the house, you can't sleep because there are things in all of the closets of the bedrooms. So creepy. One parapsychologist who investigated the house identified the problem with the house as an infestation, which is something I've identified in a couple different places, including Joliet Prison, Bachelor's Grove Cemetery here in Chicago. An infestation is it means that a place has been literally taken over by demons. I'm not one to scream demon, demon everywhere, but there have been maybe 2 or 3 places in my entire career where I believe this has happened. And you not only know by the quality of the activity that's reported, but also by the influence on the people involved. It's a very dark energy that evolves, that affects people and travels with people. And some people believe that a visit by Andrew Cunanan to the mansion at one point may have influenced him to come back and to commit this murder and commit his other murders as well. Very, very strange place. And again, it's open now as a hotel, and a lot of people who stay there even today, talk about all of these bizarre noises they hear and apparitions they see, but essentially, and most essentially, that dark quality about the place. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. Yeah, another female serial killer, Eileen Wuornos, and another one whose stories was made into a film, some years ago. This is the film Monster, starring Charlize Theron, is about Eileen Wuornos. A lot of people look at Eileen Wuornos, women look at Eileen Wuornos as a hero because she had, what she ended up doing was, she was a prostitute. And, after being treated very poorly by a lot of her escorts, she decided to take control, and she ended up shooting 7 men at, point blank range, and of course being tried for their murders. So a lot of women look at her as sort of a hero, but I don't look at her as a hero. I think she's a serial killer. But so there are a number of places associated with Eileen Wuornos that are known to be haunted today. In fact, she's very prolific, and she's still very angry, apparently. One of the people who have talked about the hauntings by Eileen Wuornos is Charlize Theron herself, who portrayed her in the film Monster. She said that when they visited the locations at first, because they were going to film in a lot of the original locations, they started to talk to a lot of the people that had known Eileen. And she learned that there had been activity that had started not only in the places that she frequented after her arrest, while she was still alive, but that it was very violent activity. The 2 main places Wuornos is supposed to haunt is the bar that she liked to drink and where she had her last drink before her arrest, which is this place called The Last Resort. And this is in Orange, I can't remember the town. I don't think I have it. I think I lost my page somewhere where I had the town. Can't remember. Oh, Port Orange. Port Orange is where she was arrested. So the Lost Resort in Port Orange is a place where they say that there's this very violent spirit of Eileen still there. I mean, we're talking about there'll be glasses, 10 glasses, empty glasses that a waitress has put down on the bar for the barkeep to take, and they will just it's like someone just swept them all right off the bar, and people will be hit by them and things like that. Bottles will fly off the shelves. Chairs will fly across the room. So very, very powerful, violent activity. Also at the hotel where she stayed, you can see down here at the bottom, I think it's called the Scoop Motel now. A lot of similarly violent activity. where there are, objects that will be hurled across the room, doors flung shut really loudly in the middle of the night when people are sleeping in the room. Got to be really scary, I would imagine. So here, I think you have a really good example of someone that was really angry in life and that just continues long after her death. And again, even though a lot of people feel that she was justified in doing what she did, she seems to have some sort of, eternal retribution for it, walking the earth here at these places where she had her last days before her arrest. David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam. This was another really extremely weird case. There were a number of these serial killer cases, as I'm sure you know, where the murderer claimed that he was instructed to commit the murders by the devil or a demon or various demons or diabolical forces. And this was one of those cases. Berkowitz claimed that he was being, kind of mentored in his killings by a neighbor's dog who was a demon. And it was the dog that belonged to a gentleman named Sam. I just gotta find my notes for this onto the table. Let me find it really quick because I want to give you the right name. He claimed that this neighbor, and some people have actually backed this up too in the ensuing years, he claimed that this neighbor was the head of a satanic cult that was operating in New York. And this cult, we now know, actually did practice ritual activity in a park in New York. People would report all the time, people in the park with torches, bonfires that were being built. They were finding murdered and skinned dogs in the park in the 1970s. So there was a lot of activity that was going on there. And he claimed that this neighbor of his was the head of this satanic cult, and that the dog was giving him these instructions to murder. So the dog's name was Harvey and his owner's name was Sam. So Son of Sam was the name that was given to David Berkowitz, the killer. This park today in New York is still believed to be haunted by Berkowitz himself, by the ghost of Son of Sam. And but I think more importantly is that idea that he was, he claimed that he was being given these instructions by a demon or the devil. We saw this too in the case of the Amityville murders, the DeFeo murders in Amityville on Long Island in the 1970s, where Ronnie DeFeo killed his entire family. And he said later on that voices in the house had told him to do it. And then there were, other stories about people that had heard voices in the house. And then there was this long history where supposedly there was satanic, either satanic worship or occult activity that went on by the Lutz family, by George Lutz, who bought the house famously, the family that lived through the so-called Amityville horror. A couple of the children in the family now claim that George Lutz was practicing the occult in the house, and that they believe that was, if not the source of what happened in the house, it definitely exacerbated it. But Ronnie DeFeo claimed that this, satanic presence in the house had told him to take a rifle and to shoot his family to death in their beds that night. So you see this, in a lot of these different cases. Albert Fish, who we already talked about, claimed that an angel was telling him to kill. The way that he was talking about his victims, these children that he raped and murdered, was in this almost biblical sense, like they were sacrifices that he was doing to God to please God, and almost like like an Abrahamic sacrifice, like in the Old Testament, you know. So you see, this is a really weird trend through a lot of these stories. And you know, as a paranormal, you know, people always brush that off, of course, but of course, as a paranormal investigator, I can tell you a lot of paranormal researchers put a lot of credence in this. And it's something that we look at very carefully because we have seen the effects of places where, for example, there are infestations. We've seen the effects that these places have on people. You know, people's personalities totally change, and don't return oftentimes. So I don't think it's a good idea to just, you know, roundly dismiss these things when we hear about them in cases like this. That's just a paranormal investigator's opinion. Okay. John Wayne Gacy. This is number 12, by the way, of our 13 serial killers. John Wayne Gacy is a story that I was already very intimately familiar with, living in Chicago and writing about the paranormal and doing ghost tours for many years. We've done many ghost tours that go by the old Gacy home site on the northwest side of Chicago. I've interviewed many people over the years that have told me stories about hauntings connected to John Wayne Gacy. Just a little background about Gacy. He committed, we believe, all of his murders on the northwest side of Chicago, most of them in his house, his ranch house on Somerdale Avenue, and perhaps several of them in the forest preserves of Cook County, nearby his house along the Des Plaines River forested area nearby. He was, you know, by all accounts, people still talk to us who knew Gacy. Sometimes they still come on our tours and they say he was this friendly, great, generous guy, loved kids. Kids loved him. He had huge parties at his house all the time. You know, the bar in the basement, luau's in the backyard, the whole bit. He dressed up like a clown. Pogo the clown was his character, would dress up for children's parties with the JCs. You know, he's a real, you know, community leader, and everyone loved him, except for the many, many young boys that he sodomized, tortured, murdered, and buried in his crawl space in his house, or disposed of in the forest reserve. It is believed that he killed at least 33 young men and boys, possibly more. This is still an open investigation. There are still open cases. They still believe there are victims that they have not even identified yet, let alone found. He was finally famously arrested 2 days before Christmas in 1978. And he was put on trial at the you see the house here. Let me just go back to this really quickly. This is the original ranch house where the murders happened and the bodies were found. They tore the house down after his arrest, and they excavated 21 feet under the house to make sure that they got any human remains that were there. And today there's this brand new house that was there. There was actually an original house that was built on the site, and then that was torn down, and now there's this much larger house there. I think it's still on the market. It was put on the market a few months ago, and I don't think it's been sold yet. So if you want to live in a serial killer's house, Gacy's house is for sale. Now, people claim that this house isn't haunted, and I don't believe that for a second. Nobody really knows, you know, that none of the owners have ever talked publicly about it, but, you know, the word on the street is that the house isn't haunted. I can't imagine that that is true. But what I can tell you for sure is that there are many ghost stories associated with John Wayne Gacy. And I'll tell you a couple of the ones that I think are the most interesting. A few years ago, I was writing my book, Chicago Haunts 3, the third edition, the third volume of my Chicago Haunts book series. And I have a couple of neighbors that are Cook County judges. And so I got to interview a deputy sheriff at the Cook County Courthouse, as you see pictured here, 26th Street in California, where Gacy was on trial. And I was interviewing him just about the courthouse. I just wanted to know basically any, ghosts and hauntings at the courthouse. And he gave me a lot of really great stories. But I was really surprised by the story that he told me about the courtroom where Gacy's trial was held. Expected, of course. So it wasn't surprising that the courtroom was haunted necessarily. I mean, all the emotion there of all the family members that were there, everyone who testified, the emotion of Gacy himself, who was there all that time. We talk about a lot about residual hauntings, and that means that some event of the past has really left an imprint on the environment. It's something so emotional that you can pick up on that energy or even see imprints of it or hear it years later. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a residual haunting here from the trial. But what this deputy sheriff told me was very different than that. He said that starting during the trial and continuing to now, that courtroom is haunted by children. Little kids, the sound of little kids like running around the courtroom, laughing, like playing in court, misbehaving in court. But Gacy's youngest victim was 14 years old. He didn't kill children, at least not that we know of. Now, did Gacy have younger victims that we don't know about that were haunting that courtroom? Or perhaps is the courtroom haunted maybe by the lost innocence of these young men that he murdered? Maybe that's another possibility. At any rate, it's a very, very strange story, and one that I've continued to find very fascinating. Another very interesting story about the John Wayne Gacy haunting has to do with his paintings. As you probably know, John Gacy was a not so great artist who painted a lot in prison. And his paintings became very valuable, to serial killer fans. You can sometimes still see them come up on eBay. But he was very fond of his paintings and very possessive of his paintings. Here's another these are self-portraits. That's a self-portrait of him. But he kept his paintings locked up in these big armoires that he had in his house on Somerville Avenue. And he had many, many paintings. So you see one of the armoires here from these photos of the Gacy house. This was his, I believe this was his bedroom. And he would keep a lot of these larger paintings in these armoires locked up. It's very, very protective of them. Well, lo and behold, I discovered last year that a good friend of mine named Robin Terry actually owns one of these armoires that Gacy would keep his paintings in. It's a long story how he came into possession of this armoire, but I'll show you a picture of it. Here's the armoire, and it's housed today in Robin Terry's combination living quarters and event venue down near Springfield, Illinois. It's a place called the R Theater. And he's restoring the place, and he holds paranormal events there where speakers come down and people ghost hunt there and things like that. Robin also runs the Ashmore Estates. That's the old poor farm down in Charleston, Illinois, a very actively haunted location where you can go and spend the night and ghost hunt, things like that. Really interesting place. I highly recommend you do that if you have never been there. But Robin keeps this armoire. He brought this armoire to the art theater where he lives. And of course, since he's a paranormal investigator and owns these haunted locations, a lot of his friends are psychics and mediums and clairvoyants. People that can see, hear, communicate with the dead. So as Robin would have people over for dinner, have parties over at his house, or people would stop by, from time to time, one of these people would say, "There's a very angry ghost in your house." And he said, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah, he's a big guy. He's really mad. You've got something of his and he doesn't like it." And he's like, interesting. Well, he has a lot of different haunted artifacts and things like that. A lot of antiques, beautiful antiques that he collects, though. So you just assume it was some kind of an attachment to one of his antiques or something he had brought home from some haunted place. Um, he did immediately go to Gacy until a mediumistic friend of his came over for dinner with her husband, who's also a medium, and they both told him point blank, John Wayne Gacy is in your house. And so they identified from picking up what they could pick up that Gacy had kept some of his paintings in this armoire that Robin had in the house. And he was very angry about it and didn't want anyone to get at his paintings. Well, Gacy's ghost apparently didn't know that there are no paintings in the armoire. It was empty when Robin got it. But from the time, that was when Robin told his dinner guests that from the time that he got the armoire, he had been able to open it up and look inside when he was thinking about buying it. But then when he got it to his house, he could not open it up again. And he has never been able to open up the armoire. In fact, last week when I asked Robin for a photo of it for our Joliet prison book, he said, by the way, it still doesn't open. So it still does not open. I just find this a very, very interesting story. Can you imagine that? Someone Gacy following this armoire all the way down to Springfield, Illinois, long after his death, connected to those paintings that were so important to him, of all things, not the crime scenes, murder scenes, graves of his victims. You'd think it would be something like that if you were back here, but no. I guess it just shows what a narcissist he really was. Okay, so that was number 12. And our number 13 is not technically considered a serial killer, but a mass murderer. But I could not include him because everybody wanted to hear about the ghost connected to Richard Speck. Richard Speck, of course, was this drifter who killed 8 student nurses down in a townhouse in the Jeffrey Manor neighborhood on Chicago's far southeast side in the 1960s. There was a 9th girl who survived. She was hiding under the bed, and she got out to the ledge in the morning after Speck had left the murder scene and started screaming for help. And they found her out on the ledge of the building. The townhouse here is the first one on the left. So Corazon Morrow had climbed out the window, was standing on this ledge screaming for help, and neighbors called police. And inside they found these strangled, stabbed, mutilated bodies all over the house. And you can see from this newspaper article photo, let me hide this for a sec so you can see it. The locations where detectives found each one of the girls on both floors, and there was just blood everywhere, and it was just a horrific scene. This was the only incident that we know of where Speck actually committed murders. He did commit a lot of other crimes. He did a lot of robberies, rapes, things like that. This appears to be the only time that he committed murder, and he committed 8 murders in the course of one night. Now, this was a very interesting arrest. People saw Speck in many different places around Chicago before his arrest. They also saw him in different places around Chicago after his arrest. This was an unusual case, which I've seen several times in my career, and it's always the case of a serial killer or a mass murderer. Someone usually highly intelligent, who is actually seen in different, it's almost like they have the ability to bilocate. They're seen in different locations even after they're incarcerated. People saw Speck in Cook County Hospital in Chicago. I got a picture here. while he was in the Cook County Jail, he had been famously discovered at Cook County Hospital where he was treated, and someone recognized his famous tattoo, which said "Born to Raise Hell," which had been reported in the newspapers when they put out a bulletin asking people to watch for him, look for him. So even after his arrest and his incarceration in Cook County Jail, Speck was still seen walking around Cook County Hospital. He was also seen by residents at the transient hotel where he had been staying. And then Speck was, of course, tried. He was sentenced to life in prison. He was eventually sent to Stateville. We'll talk about in a second, but as you may or may not know, the old Joliet prison was supposed to be replaced by Stateville Penitentiary in the 1920s. It was considered, the old prison was considered unhealthy, very dark and damp, overcrowded, etc. So Stateville was built as this, modern, state-of-the-art prison, and all of the old prisoners were supposed to go to the new prison, and the old prison was supposed to be closed. But because of World War II, that didn't happen. Both of the prisons remained open, until the old prison was closed in 2002. But there were less dangerous criminals that were then kept at the old prison. They were sent to more maximum security facilities like Stateville, Nard, etc. But even after, sorry, I'm trying to find that. Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. Even after the old Joliet prison here was kind of closed for maximum security prisoners, every prisoner that was sentenced to life in prison or was sentenced to death in Illinois was processed at the old prison. There's a processing center on the grounds that everybody went through. So if you were sentenced to life in prison or you were sentenced to death, you would go first to the old Joliet prison, and you would stay typically for about a month, where you would undergo a series of medical tests, psychological tests. They would see how you interacted with other inmates, and in that way they could assess the best maximum security prison, the best prison to send you to, whether it was maximum or moderate security prison, whatever. Maybe there was a place where there were facilities for more intelligent or more social inmates and so forth. Excuse me one more time. Sorry about that. So Speck spent about a month at the old Joliet prison. It's very interesting because out of all the serial killers and murderers and rapists in Illinois history who have been incarcerated at old Joliet prison, executed at old Joliet prison, and spent time in processing at old Joliet prison, one of the only ones that seems to haunt there today is Richard Speck. His ghost was reportedly seen by a number of guards that we interviewed, a number of former inmates that we interviewed, and even by our medium that was also our site manager when we hosted the tours and ghost hunts at the prison in 2018. Colleen Nadas was at the prison every single night of our about 9 weeks doing the tours and ghost hunts at the prison. And she said during all that time, one of the only known people, famous people that was incarcerated at the prison that she thinks she saw there, she's still not even sure that it was him, was Richard Speck. And she said the place that she saw him on a couple of occasions was near the chapel, which is also near the basketball courts. This was an area where on almost all of our nightly tours, our guides and our tour guests would be pelted with rocks as they walked through this area. So again, not only her on our team, but also former guards and inmates claiming to have seen the ghost of Richard Speck near the chapel at old Joliet prison. All right, let me get out of here and back to our main screen. And now I am going to thank you so much for being here with me tonight. And I'm going to ask you. I really hope you've enjoyed this. I understand if you have to go. I know we speak such a long time. I just put a quarter in me, like they say. I could go on for hours and hours. I understand if you have to go. I will be uploading this whole recording as soon as we're done. It usually takes about 15 minutes to upload, and then I'll email you a link through Eventbrite and send you the link to the recording so you can watch it again if you want, or share it with your family. So thanks for coming. If you do have to go, I just want to let you know, if you are interested in, more about these murderers and rapists and killers, including Speck and Gacy, who were at Joliet Prison for a while. The new book, The Haunting of Joliet Prison, it comes out September 1st. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon or at our website, juliethauntings.com. That has the book order form. It's on sale right now. And we also have a live stream book signing on September 6th. You can find info about that on Facebook too. So I hope you'll enjoy that. There are, I think, 3 books about Joliet Prison coming out in the next couple months. So it's The Haunting of Joliet Prison, Ursula Bielski. So I hope you check that out. Now, for those of you who would like to stay, I would be really happy to try to answer any questions you might have, hear any stories you might have about this subject matter, or just, comments, chat, whatever you'd like to do. And so if you just since there's a small group of us, rather than chat, if you'd like to just unmute yourself, you can also unmute your video if you like, or just leave that muted if you don't want him to see you. That's fine too. So questions, anyone? Comments, questions? No, I was so good. So good, there's no questions. Really?
Shy. Yeah.
Ursula, thanks so much again for an enjoyable evening. Just wondering if you have done any investigation about the Glenshee Mansion up in Duluth, Minnesota.
And Marjorie Condon.
I have not. What's the connection with the mansion?
It's Marjorie Condon who has committed at least, I believe, four murders up there.
Right. Oh, so that's the name. That's the name of the house.
Yes.
I have not. I have not heard of anybody who's investigated there either.
Well, that's your next assignment.
I love it. Do you guys live up there?
No, actually, we're in Waunakee, Wisconsin, but we went on a tour of the mansion up there a couple of years ago. Fascinating tour. But they don't like to talk about her too much.
Of course, they don't like to talk about any of that stuff, right? I imagine.
But there's at least one book out there that describes her activities, as well as her never really being put in prison for her activities. So she was just kind of walking around offing people here and there. So
yeah, that's a weird story too.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm on it. And you'll be the first to know when I find out.
Thank you so much. I really love, you've really made our summer very happy. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that so much. It's just been, I don't know, if I hadn't had this to do, it would be so miserable and depressing. I mean, you think this would be miserable and depressing, doing lectures about serial killers, but being able to talk to you guys and spend time together and continue to just, create this stuff and put it out there is just wonderful. So
it is. Thank you so much. You're a true artist.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, chat? All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. It has been such a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this. Look for the email and within the half hour. And I hope to see you guys out there in the real world sometime soon. Hang in there. Be safe. God bless you and your families. And I will see you all soon, I hope. Good, and have a wonderful night. No bad dreams. Take care.